thanks for tuning in. Karen Cruz here, and I just wanted to talk with you a little bit about how I really believe the conflict and struggles that we face in marriage are really meant to be a pathway to deeper healing, vulnerability, and connection with our spouses. You know, we're often tempted to see these conflicts, these issues, as just signs for hopelessness, signs of, well, I guess that's just not meant for me. Maybe I just need to suck it up and just accept that this is just how it's always going to be. And this can lead to just kind of and maybe the best case, like a dullness in marriage, or sometimes just a hopelessness and just a general kind of sometimes apathy and just lack of joy, you know, as we just begin to feel like maybe on some level we ended up settling. We thought we were getting one thing, and here we are in a different place. And so I just want to talk about how I really believe all those places where our hearts are pricked in marriage, where we just feel like this is an ache, this is a desire that I really thought I was meant to have. I was meant to, on some level, be fulfilled in marriage, and it's just not happening. And what to do with that. And so, first of all, I just want to say that it's good to acknowledge those desires to be seen by your spouse, to be truly known and loved for who you are, to be soothed when you're upset and like longing for comfort, that you want to go to your spouse with that ache and you long for them to actually give you comfort. You know, you want to feel secure, that you're not worried about, is he going to be there? Is he not going to be there? No, these are God-given ways of connecting that are good. And that the answer isn't to dull those. The answer isn't to say, oh, those are silly, like I don't need those. That's, you know, that's maybe too much, you know, because that's definitely a temptation. And I just want to say those exact same needs to be seen, to be secure, to be soothed, to be safe, all of that. These are the same needs that a kid has in their family, to grow and to develop and to become all that they're made to be. And to the degree that those needs aren't met in our families and our upbringings, you know, it wreaks havoc. It causes wounds in our hearts and our ways of seeing and believing and all of that. And so that all kind of comes to the surface in marriage. In marriage, all that junk comes up, and it's not meant to just be like, well, this is just terrible, I just can't believe this is happening, but it is really because the Lord wants us to deal with it. Marriage is a pathway to holiness, and so it can be hard. It can be really hard, but it's hard for a reason. And that if we can begin to shift our perspective and begin to embrace the hard, begin to get curious about it, like, why does this hurt so much? What's going on here? And not shut down our hearts, but the first thing I really believe is to begin to get curious and begin to bring it to the Lord. And look inward. That the first step is never to be like, you know, this is what you need to do, this is what my husband needs to change. If he would just change this, if he would just do this, everything would be fine. I'm not going to disagree that there probably are some things that are going on that do need to change. Obviously, none of us are perfect, and we can often see things that maybe our spouse has a blind spot over. But we also know from experience practically that like pointing out other people's flaws is never usually the best first step to real change. Definitely internal exploration, really digging deep and saying, okay, what is going on within me that I can take ownership for? So this first video, I really just want to encourage you in a gentle, non-judgmental way to begin to get curious and ask yourself, like, what can I take ownership for? You begin to look at the patterns of conflict and struggle and heartache in your marriage and begin to look at first, like, what's happening? Let's just look at it from just an objective standpoint. Like, what's actually happening here? What am I feeling? What am I expecting in the situation? What am I doing? How am I reacting to the conflict, to the issue? And then what do I want? You know, what do I actually want? What is the desire of my heart here that it's not being met? And to begin to look at that, and then to get curious and see, is there a pattern here? Did this similar sort of pattern, this similar sort of experience happen before my spouse? Because a lot of times it has. A lot of times there's an echo of it somewhere in your past, whether it's family of origin or other, you know, difficult experiences in the past where you're sort of like re-experiencing a wound a lot of times. To begin to get curious about that, like write that down. Like, well, this reminds me of my relationship with my father. This reminds me of my relationship with my sibling, or with, an ex-boyfriend, or whatever it is. Just like get curious about it and begin to see those patterns, because those patterns are clues. Because what can happen is that sometimes we are bringing into our, well, very often, not just sometimes, we are bringing into our marriage and reacting to things that aren't even all what's happening in front of us. We're reacting to stuff from the past, and it's amplifying what's happening in the present to a degree that if we could deal with the stuff from the past, we could just be reacting, or more able to just react to what's actually happening here. So begin to get curious about what is going on in your heart that might be something from the past that the Lord is calling you to look at, that He wants to speak to you about. And just begin to sort through that this week. And I just want to give you an example to tell you from my own story, just to give you an idea of what I mean. So, in my own experience, I had this longing to connect emotionally with my spouse, and just this ache that it was like, why aren't we connecting? Why isn't this happening? I really want this, but it's not happening. And I feel sad, and I feel lonely, like this like we'd get together and like there's no conversation happening. There's no real interaction. Like nothing necessarily bad was happening, but there wasn't anything like deep. And I was longing for that depth. And I was feeling sad and feeling lonely. I was expecting there not to be anything. To be honest, my expectation wasn't one of like, oh, we're going to get together tonight and have a deep conversation. So that plays a part. That's why I tell people to write that down, to pay attention to that. And the desire of my heart, the longing of my heart, was to really experience this deep connection, this deep sense of being seen and heard and all of that. And I began to see that because of my expectation, and because of this longing, longing, my natural tendency to opportunities where maybe we could like connect or have a deep conversation, was I would preemptively, if I was really honest with myself, like kind of pull back. Like I would find myself feeling tongue-tied, feeling unable to speak, unable to share. Where normally, like if I'm with any other friend or person, I'm like an open book, and I would just chat and just like, oh, this is what's going on, But with my spouse, I noticed like I had to take ownership. Like I'm longing for this connection, but I'm not initiating it. I'm not reaching out, or if I am, it's like awkward because of all the junk that's going on in my head. And I had to get really honest that I hadn't really dealt with some of my own core issues of feeling unseen, unheard in my own experiences growing up. Again, I always tell people this isn't about blaming or anything like, oh, my parents didn't do this or anything like that, but it's just about naming our experience of loneliness, our experience of feeling like, well, nobody really asked, like nobody ever really seemed to care. I didn't really have deep conversations with anybody in my family growing up. And not that there's any blame happening there, but just a naming of like, that was something that I never maybe even knew that it was a longing of my heart at that point, but it was a gap, in my experience that caused an ache, that caused a wound, that led to an expectation that those close to me aren't really that interested. They just don't, they've got their things going on. Like they're not really curious. They're not really interested. And so there was a hurt there. There was an expectation and an unhealed wound that needed to be brought to the surface. And that expectation was fueling my own interactions with my spouse. So as I began to deal with that, and as I began to recognize that, I began to say, I need to push through this discomfort and begin to take ownership for how I'm sort of creating, in a certain sense, a self-fulfilling prophecy here. I'm creating this deeper issue than it would be if I could just take ownership and say, how am I contributing to this based on my own past experiences? I'm creating, I tell people, what's the story you're telling yourself? I'm telling myself a story that my spouse doesn't care really, that he's not really interested. And it's creating this emotional turmoil in my heart that really isn't actually rooted in what's actually happening. It's more in my head. So this is a little bit of an example. So this is like the first part. I also want to talk about, kind of what's in your head regarding your spouse and how you're interpreting what's on their end. But first we're going to start with just get a little curious, your own story, how you have had similar experiences again of whatever is going on with your spouse that kind of echoes from the past. Begin to look at that. Look at what's going on. Let's recap here. What's actually happening? What are your thoughts on it? What are your feelings on it? What's your expectations in the situation? What are your behaviors as a result of all these things? What are you choosing to do? And then what do you actually want? Like, what is the desire of your heart? Can you name that longing? Because that's a really important longing to give yourself permission to have, that you don't deaden that longing. And begin to see like where that might be rooted in the past, and get curious. See if there's an area of healing that the Lord wants you to bring to him, so that what you're dealing with your spouse in the day-to-day isn't so charged up by maybe an unhealed wound from the past that the Lord wants to address with you, so that you can not be carrying all the stuff from past into what you're facing with your spouse day-to-day. So hopefully this might give you a little bit to think on and pray on today. Know that I am walking with you. Feel free to shoot me a message if you have questions, or shoot me an email at 2heartsforher@gmail.com. And I look forward to connecting with you in the next video. God bless.